saying what you're going to do and actually doing it. I find in almost every organization that struggles with any type of leadership is that leaders lead, and it isn't that there's not intent, it just doesn't happen. And so the younger generation specifically, and I don't know that my generation or even millennials, but that younger generation, like they will call you on it. And if you're not willing to say like, yeah, you're right, I said that and I still have done nothing and it's been 6 months, like, that's a problem. So if you have no real legs behind whatever you say, like just don't say it.
Welcome to Navigate's People First podcast. Thank you all for joining us. Please continue to subscribe and like our podcast if we are bringing value to your day. Jay and I are excited to get started. And today we are tackling engaging and managing today's multi-generational workforce. We're so happy to have Ali Payne, president of ethOs and one of our favorite friends of Navigate. I would say one of the leaders in the industry when it comes to thought leadership and where the industry is at, where it's going. Ali, welcome to the show. Maybe give a little bit of background about yourself and what ethOs does to bring value to employers.
Sure. Thanks, Troy. Good to see you both. I'm excited to be here. I've been in the industry for way too long. And I think the really interesting thing that's happening over the course of, or has happened over the course of the last few years, that as employers are really taking a step back and saying, I keep offering all of these resources. I keep offering all these things that I think employees want. And, one thing that's really been missing is that we don't always understand who's in our workforce. And not only who's in our workforce, but what do they want and need to do the job that you hire them to do? Or how do you get more out of them in the work that they do every day? And I think, we talk a lot about engagement. And when we started ethOs, it really wasn't about necessarily the generations or even about the resources. It was really about engagement. And engagement is a relatively overused term. Everyone uses it. Everyone has a different definition of it. And I'm trying to figure out a way to stop using the word engagement and really just talk about experience. Because at the end of the day, it's really about the experience, which may hopefully lead to better engagement results. And so at ethOs, our goal is to get employers just to purely just think differently about how they get employees to show up every day. And that could be through an experience. It could be through, do I have the right resources at the right time? It could be through leader development. It could be through, thinking about how we communicate. It could be through technology platforms, really all the things that make up an employee wanting to work for an organization and really do what they love. The generations in the workforce is interesting because it's the first time in history that 5 generations are in the workforce. And we're really on the cusp of that 5th generation getting out of the workforce. So I would guess in the next 3 to 5 years, you will not have traditionalists in the workforce anymore. And traditionalist is really someone who's 70 plus. And even your late 60s would be considered traditionalists. So they are still in the workforce. And then you have on the other end of the spectrum, Gen Z. Gen Z is your people who are just out of college, right? They're the people who are really driving a lot of the change that's happening. And then you have everywhere in between. You've got Gen Y, which is millennial. You've got Gen X, which is my generation, the best generation. And then, of course, you have the boomers. And the boomers also are, a lot of them during COVID retired because they were ready. They decided that they were tired of doing what they were doing, and they had a new outlook on life because they were at home or not at home and decided that their workplace wasn't for them. And so we actually saw an influx of boomers retire during COVID and shortly after. So the workforce in and of itself is very, very different. It's very, very much changing. And I think the next 5 to 10 years are going to be even more interesting in that alpha generation is upon us. Your oldest alpha is 11 years old today. They will be hitting the workforce, in the next 5 to 10 years. And I actually think that might be the last generation that we give it a name, because there's this integration of the generations that are happening. I think about myself as a human, and I would never in the world when I was 5 years old or 9 years old as my daughter is, I would never wear the same clothes my mom wears. But today, my daughter and I, we essentially wear a lot of the same clothes. Athleisure is a real thing. where before that really wasn't something that truly happened. We didn't listen to the same music. And today I listen to the same music as my 9-year-old. You wouldn't necessarily have seen that, in my generation. And we're starting to see those generations come closer and closer together with the things that they want. So it's a really interesting time. And a lot of employers are finally, I think, saying, I'm going to have to do something different for each of my generations. I can't just do what I've always done, which is communicate the same way, offer the same resources, and not necessarily change how I'm delivering those resources to employees. And that's really what ethOs tries to do, is help employers think about the different generations and how you communicate and how you utilize the right resources at the right time for your people.
I want to go there because you talked about communication. One, you talked about understanding the needs and variety. When you think about understanding the needs of the different generations, how are organizations going about that? How are they listening? How are they gaining the knowledge of that variety that they need to engage or provide a better employee experience?
Yeah, I think two things are at least come on my radar right away, which are, number one, most employers can tell me two things about their workforce. They can tell me their average age, which is typically anywhere from 41 to 48. And then they can tell me what percentage of male versus female. And that's really it. That's all they can tell me about their workforce. And they might have great HRIS systems and they might have great ways to look at the data, but they're not necessarily doing anything with the data. And so really being able to take a step back and saying, do the generations that I have in my workforce align with the resources that I have? And a lot of times resources, we find that a lot of employers don't even know the resources that they have. So most employers today have resources in every single one of the buckets of well-being. And that's just how we think about it. That doesn't mean that the employer has to use the well-being terms. But when I think about like Navigate's platform has the ability to slice and dice their resources in a way that helps an employee connect to a resource when they need it. So that's like that hub idea, right? So if I need a financial resource, I can go to one place on the Navigate platform and I can say, oh, they have these resources in financial well-being, whether it's a resource on the Navigate platform or if it's a resource that the employer has invested in and also has it on the Navigate platform. I love that about the work that you all do, in that there's a way that you're connecting to the employee, your end user, to get them the resource at the right time. The problem is that most employers have so many resources that the employee has no idea about the amazing resources that they have. And so that's, again, a reason why that technology platform makes so much sense for an employer, because it is an easier way to get an employee to the resource that they need at the right time. So if you understand the generation that you have in your workforce and you're connecting them to resources that are easy to find and make a lot more sense than saying, hey, I have this, World Wide Web of all the things, you're really giving them a path to help them find what they really need.
You and I have sat across the table. You brought us into different groups, whether it be public and labor, manufacturing, 10,000, 20,000 plus employer groups. And really, it comes down to HR folks really caring for their individuals, trying to give them variety, knowing that one size doesn't fit all. And I think that using data for good is something that I think that those of us have been in the well-being space for 20 years or so. It's wonderful to see that the data coming back to be able to, provide that variety, which is key, but then also adapt based on real-time data that we're learning. Jay, when we go to data and we think about using that data for good, maybe talk about how that multiple data sets is helping with that employee experience overall.
One of the most impressive things I think we can offer is the ability to expand the data set beyond traditional biometrics, age, demographic, where you are, health risk assessment. And then some of those ancillary offerings that we have, engagement surveys, we have DEI surveys, we can add on to our own capabilities so that you're not pigeonholed with the traditional data set that everybody's already seen and tells you, okay, here are your averages. And biometrics are great. They really do a lot for us. But at the end of the day, I can tell you in all likelihood within plus or minus a couple of percentage points of how many people are going to be in high glucose levels or where your BMI's average going to be based on your industry and your age. So what's really interesting is the ability to expand beyond that. And you take a group like ethOs who's advising you and telling you all the things you need to be thinking about. And then you can utilize a tool like Navigate's platform to understand a little bit better, to get that data, to listen. And that's what we talk a lot about, listening and then talking less. And I think that's really what we're talking about here, is understanding your population sometimes just means be quiet and listen to what they have to say.
Managing that workforce today involves viewing everyone as an individual. It also, for me, it's developing those mentoring relationships. Ali, maybe talk about how mentoring is connecting those multi-generations on what the want and the needs of fulfilling that purpose, or even connecting, recent graduates with, grandparents.
I think, Jeremy, you make a really good point around the data is only as good as you want to use the data for, right? And I think we have in the wellness industry, spent so much time saying that the data tells us this, so we should do that. And I think what we haven't done is listen to our people, right? So we haven't necessarily done a really good job of saying, okay, here's what the data says, but here's actually what our people want or what they need. And that's really where I think the generational piece has come together. And as you think about how the generations are impacting the work that we do, millennials are not young. The oldest millennial is 43 today. So it isn't like they haven't not been in the workforce or they're inexperienced or they haven't been around long enough to know anything about anything, but they really have. And in many cases, they're our leaders of our organizations. And so when you're connecting people to something that's meaningful to them, you have a lot better opportunity to use the data for good. And the idea around taking a young employee, doesn't matter where they're working, it doesn't matter what industry they're in, and you're connecting them to something that's bigger than them and could actually make an impact in how they think and how they act and what they do, that mentorship can never be stronger if you're really connecting people to what they want and what they need versus telling them what to do or suggesting because the data says X, Y, or Z. You just think that they should just say, okay, yeah, I'm going to do it. But if they have something that they want that's completely about them personally, because you actually listen to them, they're going to be a lot more apt to want to participate or want to engage in something that's better than just their own personal health. So I don't necessarily know if I'm answering your question around connecting to grandparents, but I think that's kind of the idea.
Sounded good.
No, it sounded great. And you're right. I'm glad you went there because I go back to also like when you think about across generations, there's like this playful tension that the generation that comes next is always like, oh, those guys, and you're battling the chuckle of the latest trends with the elders, but yet the younger folks are saying like, how did you ever get this done with this technology? What is this telephone?
Well, what I think is really interesting about that is that we find every day we have people that complain about the younger generation, right? So you'll have boomers, you'll even have traditionalists, you'll even have Gen Xers like me complain about the millennials. And I always say, well, just so you know, you're the ones who raised the millennials, right? So like, if you're mad about however they're acting in the workforce, so you think they're lazy, y'all, we did it to ourselves because we're the ones raising these kids that all have to get participation ribbons and have to be groomed the way that we were never groomed, right? I think about my role in developing ethOs when I started at a small, mom and pop shop for a benefit consultant. They didn't say like, hey, Ali, here's your development plan and you're going to go from point A to point B in 6 months. Like that never happened. I literally had to knock on Jeff Azen's door and say, hey, Jeff, can you please bring me to this meeting? I don't know anything about HSAs. And it looks like you're going to talk about HSAs and I have no idea what they are. And so I had to ask for development every single day. I didn't go to my boss and say, I need developed. Like I figured out a way to be developed. And that's another thing that Michelle Wheel on our team talks about all the time is we get developed every single day if we're willing to get developed. So to have a development program that tells me what I'm going to do every day is really not something that I ever wanted. Like it would have been great if someone had given me like an outline, but man, I wouldn't be where I am today if I was waiting for someone else to develop me. Like I had to go out and do it. And I think a lot of our millennials and Gen Zs need to understand that that's you. Yeah, of course you want to ask for development at the same time, like figure out how you do it yourself too.
And that's going back to that developing that mentoring relationship, which I think is something that each generation in the workforce today is amazingly asking for. And for me, that's one of the things that I think is awesome to see about it's fueling more conversation. It's fueling more exchange of knowledge and perspectives, which we're trying to do. And I think that all is underneath the well-being umbrella. And we can use well-being for good and that data for good to kind of create more collaboration and more exchanging of ideas amongst those generations.
Yeah. And that's why I love the idea that we are trying to get people to stop calling it traditional wellness and really trying to think about it from a well-being perspective, because we have people every day that ask us, how do I get my traditionalists to retire? And many times it's not because they don't want to, it's that they think that they can't.
Mm-hmm.
They think that they can't financially do it. They don't know what their purpose would be outside of work, because that generation, I mean, they lived to work. Their whole purpose, everything that is about them was about their work and how they were going to provide for their family, right? And so helping them understand that, yes, your retirement, you can do it, right? So how do we connect them to the right resources from a retirement standpoint? But also, how do you connect them to knowing what their purpose could be outside of work? And we're finding that a lot of people simply aren't retiring because they're just afraid. And so how do you help an employer see you can help them? You can connect them to the right resources to help them determine that A, financially they can do it, and B, they can do it because they will and they can have a purpose outside of work.
And businesses can benefit from those folks retiring. I have two wonderful mentors, Steve Whitty and Sally Imig, who retired. And I told them both the day after they retired, I said, you have way too much fuel in the tank. Would you be willing to, visit with our team members? Would you work on projects? Let's dream big about what your next chapters are. And I would say that they brought so much to us when it came to knowledge and institutional knowledge of what's going on in our marketplace and the financial marketplace. But then we brought back another level of opportunity for them and served as a catalyst for their purpose in that next chapter. And they continue to work with us today. And that's probably one of my best days ever of saying, hey, let's continue your work and your pathway. You're worth it. You've got this. Let's keep moving. Being creative in the opportunities to connect people, to me, is one of those things that I think involves, again, viewing people as individual, looking for those mentoring relationships, but then also checking your communication methods, right? Jay, when you think about communication methods, that's one of the things we've been pressing about is helping managers communicate to the well-being of their staff. Maybe talk to that a little bit.
I think it's got to start with just being a good empathetic leader, being a good empathetic person, to be perfectly honest with you. I think that's where the start of a good leader sits. And, I don't have the answer to this, except that I try my best to understand the people that work for me and what they want to accomplish in their lives. And I want to be generous of my time. And I want to help them achieve their goals, because I recognize that that's the best way for me to achieve my goals, is to help everybody who's down there working for me. I recognize I'm starting to get a little older, crusty white guy, and I'm Gen Z or Gen X, cusp of millennial. Do you have any recommendations on how to stay? I don't want to stay current. I was never current. I probably won't be able to relate, but how I can do a better job, not necessarily relating, but communicating to the people that work. I'll give you an example, right? I went out looking at TikTok. I am not a TikTok user. That is, I don't use social media in general.
Jay,
but
going to TikTok.
Specifically, I wanted to know how younger generations were talking about work. And I saw a lot of stuff that was not the most positive, and not necessarily put in a constructive way. And then I'm looking at a lot of the advice and I'm going, that is terrible advice. And am I wrong? Are they wrong? Like, is this really not terrible? So if you were to guide me in one direction, or a couple of pieces of advice to say, how can I stay, current, or stay empathetic in my leadership?
That's a good question. I don't know that there's one way to do that. I think it's listening, which we already talked a lot about, is listening, understanding. It comes back every single time to people listen, but you have to listen to understand. And I think that's our biggest issue, right? And it's not new, right? We've been talking about it since, I don't even know when, I think I recently was just reading an article about actually listening And it went back to one of the dysfunction books. And that was like published in like 1989 or 1987 or something. So we're still talking about the fact that we do not listen as humans, right? We listen to respond. We don't actually listen to hear and understand what that person's really getting at. So I would tell you, listen hard, and, try not to respond as quickly as you can. The other thing that I would say that I think like goes for, it doesn't matter what generation you are, but as a leader, the biggest thing you can do for your team is saying what you're going to do and actually doing it. I find in almost every organization that struggles with any type of leadership is that leaders lead, and it isn't that there's not intent, it just doesn't happen. And so the younger generation specifically, and I don't know that my generation or even millennials, but that younger generation, like, they will call you on it. And if you're not willing to say like, yeah, you're right, I said that and I still have done nothing and it's been 6 months, like, that's a problem. So if you have no real legs behind whatever you say, like, just don't say it. That seems to be something that I find every leader, it doesn't matter if the leader's 80, 40, 32, like, that just really rubs that younger generation the wrong way. And I would even say younger millennials find that's something that people really struggle with. It's no different than what's really happening in like sustainability, right? Where we keep saying like, we're going to do better and we're going to get to carbon neutral by 2025, and 2025 is next year. And I think a lot of the organizations that said that are not anywhere close to being carbon neutral. So we can't make big, strong statements without being able to back it up with something. And that the listening and that is the two big things that I see leaders.
Sounds like it's about integrity
and trust.
Yeah.
Ali, when you think about your work within cities, municipalities, you're working with police officers and firefighters, administration in cities. How are you bringing and fostering trust and collaboration amongst those different jobs, but then also those different generations?
Open communication. That's the biggest one. And being willing to be an open ear and talk to their people. I mean, it doesn't matter what city or what county, even just any organization. We continue to find that no one is asking them what they want, what they need, and even as little as like, how do you want to be communicated with? Right? So we just say email. And it's funny because you ask employees how they want to be communicated with, and almost 9 times out of 10, they say email. Right? But when you actually talk to them, they're like, well, email's okay. And I like email because I can go back to it, but I generally don't read it until I need it. Right? So there's this like weird...
Or read the whole thing.
Yeah. It's like,
right.
If it's a long page email, they're definitely not going to read it. But if you put it into a one sentence and a couple bullet points of like, here's what you need to know from this email, like, you're going to get more bang for your buck than if you put a long drawn out email that no one's actually going to read. It's got to be quick. It's got to be short. So I always think about like, okay, I think about the old school Twitter days, which is now I think X, or I don't even know anymore, but whatever Twitter used to be, let's call it Twitter. Back in the day, there was a character limit, right? That's what I always think about when I write an email. Like, how do I make this as brief as possible and to get my point across so that people will actually read it? Not 800 words or characters that someone probably won't read. And if they do, they are missing half of it. So,
but that's you bridging the generational differences right there, right? Being able to bring those things together. One of the things I would say, you always try to keep learning. We're learning, right? I always say, we're pleased, but we're not satisfied. And so we continue to kind of figure out what the best practices are. When you think about how are companies leveraging like emotional intelligence, that sort of training when it comes to mindfulness, well-being within their cultures?
I actually think a lot of it has to do with the fact that no one likes to hear the word emotional intelligence, and no one likes to be called out that they don't have it. And I don't even know what the
true definition of emotional intelligence.
What is it? And who's writing the definition? Like, are we using Webster's dictionary definition, or what are we really calling it? So again, I think that the whole thing around, and I think that we also use the word leadership in a weird way, in that I believe everyone's a leader at every company, right? Like, I don't care if you're the first employee to the 500th, whatever it is, like, every single person in your organization is a leader of some sort. They might not be a leader in your company, but they're a leader at home, or they're a leader in their community, or whatever it is. And so helping people understand what that means to you as a leader, I think could start just by helping with some of that emotional intelligence, right? Like your actions mean something, whether it's to the person that sits next to you or the person that looks up to you or the person that looks down on you, like whatever it is. If we could just start with those very simple things on how people will interact with you, that's a really big deal. And I'll never forget my first 360 of my career. I was probably, I don't know, 22 maybe. The feedback that I got and this is the other thing, like we don't use feedback always for good. We use feedback for bad, right? So someone gets a 360, and a 360 is when you send a survey that asks a number of questions out to the people that you pick, your peers. And it usually brings back good feedback and bad feedback. But of course, everyone only focuses on the bad feedback, right? Even though the good feedback could be just as powerful as the bad feedback, but we all spend time thinking that we're so bad. And so how do we get better at what we're bad at? And the first 360 that was ever done on me, and I've had many in my life, but the first one, they told me that I was I was too like nose down and like didn't spend time getting to know people. And I was like, I don't even know what that means. Like what? Like, I love to talk and I love to talk to all these people and whatever. And they were like, well, yeah, but you like, when you come into the office, like you go to the copy machine and you just make copies. You don't even talk to anyone. You're at the copy machine. And I was like, why does that matter? Well, you don't seem very warm. Like you really want to get to know people. And I was like, wow, all I have to do is talk to people at the copy machine. Like that's pretty easy. But had I not done that, like people may have never given me that feedback. And so really thinking about how I show up is super impactful, whether I'm a leader or not. Like how I show up and how I present myself is really big deal. And it doesn't matter if you're a leader or you're someone who's been here a hot second, like that really matters. But we don't talk a lot about like how you show up.
Yeah. It's that fostering open communication. And Jay, we spent a disproportionate amount of time, providing Navigate You Insight, Navigate being the first well-being company to offer that personality assessment, integrated within the platform. That's another data point that I think that is unleashing better communication, that is fostering different generations talking to one another. Where do you go with, sustaining that continued opportunity for communication and, just bringing different generations together by using, a survey like that as we're connecting other data points?
For me, it's about understanding. We've talked about listening, we've talked about communication, but to me, it's about one layer removed. It's kind of trying to understand where the person's coming from and knowing that everybody comes to work with something a little bit different, right? Maybe you had good reason for not chatting people up at the copy machine. Maybe people spent the first 30 minutes of every day there and you had to get some stuff done because you wanted to achieve some stuff. Or maybe there's neurodivergency out there that someone's like, that's, I want to be on point and I want to, I think it's about understanding where someone's coming from, and that you really don't have any idea unless you talk to them, unless you give them the opportunity to open up. And for me, even if you don't want to open up, that's okay. And a part of that understanding is accepting where people are coming from and where they want to meet you. And maybe they want to meet you highly engaged and talk about your weekend. And that's where your first 10 minutes of your one-on-ones go. And maybe someone is not at all interested in that. And you've got to understand that's where they want to go. So to me, understanding where someone's coming from and the Navigate You tool is a really powerful way to help foster those conversations, help bridge a little understanding to lack of understanding. And I think it's about just being open to people that are different than you.
Ali, when you think about the best practices or things that you've seen strategically work or working right now, maybe give the listeners an idea of like, here's some things that we're seeing tactically that folks are really doing to foster this communication, this mentoring, this connection with their culture of these multi-generations out there.
So I think the first thing that a lot of organizations are doing is actually taking a step back and understanding what are the things inside each of the generations that we need to be knowledgeable about. So like we love talking about authority, like the younger generations or every generation's view of authority. So you think about your boss, right? So the older generation like endures their leader, endures their boss, like wants to, be their boss. And the younger generation says, I don't even really think I need them. Like I can learn, at least my leader today, I can learn everything they teach me by YouTubing it. So they need someone to be more of
Knowledge-based learning.
yeah, they need to be a coach and like, how do I get better at what I'm doing? Give me feedback on how do I get better at what I'm doing? Not teach me how to do something, because I can go to the World Wide Web and figure out how to do something. I can watch YouTube on how to do something. And so I think that is one thing that a lot of companies are trying to do, is truly understand the generation. And then saying, in my company, in my organization, who do I have? Like, am I primarily Gen Z or primarily millennial or baby boomer, right? Like, so really understanding who's in my organization, and how do I change my communication? How do I change how I lead? How do I change the things that I do? It's kind of, you think about like every company that's been around for, 5 to 10 years plus, they probably don't do the same thing that they did when they started the company, right? So when you think about like going from like a bunch of people having happy hours, and you think about when you were young, and then all of a sudden people got into where they started having a family or they got married, and so then they didn't necessarily need the connections at work like they needed to before they had a family or had a significant other. And then they got into like, now I have to figure out, how do I take care of my parents and take care of my own kids or my own family, or they got a dog, or, there are all these things that have changed that even though we think millennials are created equal, they're not. Justin Timberlake and Dua Lipa, is that her name? Like, they are both millennials.
Like, bam, right
Dua
there.
Lipa?
Dua Lipa. That was close. That was good.
Right? Thank you. Like,
guys.
they're both millennials. They're both millennials, and they are very, very different millennials, right? So it's kind of interesting how we think about like all millennials are created equal. They're not. And they shouldn't be, because one's 43 and one's 27. Like, it's a very different, but as organizations, we think that they all, need and want the same thing. And we really have to get mindful about digging deep into what they're doing. Also, you could have millennials that have had 7 or 8 different jobs, where like you look at a Gen Xer or a baby boomer, they may only have ever had 2. So it's also like, how are you creating this environment that's okay with having 7 or 8 jobs? Or are you looking for a millennial, which there's not a lot out there, that have only had 1 job and they're going to come to you? And so how do we make sure that we're thinking more broadly about who we're bringing into our organization, but also who do we have in our organization, so we're creating the environment that we want and offering the resources that we know they want? And that starts with just asking them and having those conversations.
So 75% of the workforce will be millennials by 2025. Ali, those are the decision makers of the next generation. Maybe talk to us about what that group is looking for when it comes to their well-being, their job, their employee experience.
I would say the top 3 or 4 things that are probably most important or most heavily weighing on their minds are around purpose. So do I work for an organization that's bigger than profitability? And I'm not saying they don't want to be paid for the work that they do. That's not what I'm saying. Sometimes I say that and people are like, well, I want to be paid, or they still want a paycheck. Well, of course they do. Like, everyone wants to be valued. We always say everyone wants to be seen, valued, and heard, and that's 100% right. So they definitely want to know that they work for an organization that is purpose-driven and not necessarily mission statement driven, really purpose-driven. And then the other thing is flexibility. So again, I think it was coming before COVID happened. I think flexibility in the workforce was coming, whether COVID was going to happen or not. I think COVID just sped it up. So flexibility. And I don't mean like in the office, out of the office, whatever. Like, that's not what this is about. This is about, do I have the flexibility and the autonomy to do what I think is right for me and the people that I work with and for? So I'm not saying in the office, out of the office. I'm saying, do I have the autonomy and flexibility to do what's right for me and where I'm at in my career? And then reward and recognition is another one. And again, I'm not simply talking about money or compensation. I'm talking about like, how are we recognizing younger talent? How are we recognizing people for doing good in the world? How are we creating this opportunity for people to recognize each other formally and informally? So I think that's also something that like people think you have to have a reward and recognition program. I don't necessarily think that. You just have to you have to create an environment that allows people to
be
reward
seen,
and
valued, and
that's
heard.
right. Yes, that's exactly right. And then the other thing that I think is kind of interesting, but DEI is at an interesting place. We see a lot of companies want DEI, but when you actually get in there, they don't necessarily want it. So I think DEI will have an interesting outcome. I think it's not that people aren't talking about it; they're just not actually doing anything about it. And so I think that will come. I just think it's taking way longer than it should.
I love seeing belonging come into play.
Yep.
And so I love seeing belonging connect that. And we're seeing more and more of organizations wrapping DEI and belonging underneath their well-being strategy overall, and helping us using our technology to kind of help listen, learn, and start building strategies and data around those strategies. And that sense of belonging, I think, is really important when it comes to the growth mindset that we want people to engage in when it comes to owning your own company or growing a company or hiring the right people to represent you within your company. When you think about including everyone, this is one of the things that we struggle with as our company is growing and Navigate. We have a third of our employees in the state of Iowa, 2/3 outside the state of Iowa, working remotely. We love that because that just brings us more diverse experiences and everything to our company, which is wonderful. We're trying to include people in different things here and there. We're doing a pretty good job of it, but what have you seen other companies do for that included factor of that diverse workforce or that dispersed workforce?
So I don't necessarily think it needs to be like inclusion as the true definition. I think you as an organization or every organization needs to define what does inclusion look like, right? So is it about including everyone and bringing everyone to one central location? I don't believe it is. But what are you doing to make people feel included in all the different things that you do, right?
Yeah, not necessarily geographically.
Right.
I would say, the personality tests that we're doing, the communication that we're doing, we're trying to have more inclusive conversations with people.
Yep.
So Troy Vincent shows up this way and talks vision and talks this, but this person needs detailed and action steps. So if I know that and I'm going into that meeting thinking that way, then that helps me have a more inclusive conversation and emotional intelligence around that conversation specifically.
Yep. The more you know.
The more you know.
The more you know. The more you know.
I can see the star coming across the screen. NBC.
Yes.
That's
the more you know.
That's a generation.
So there's not a lot of differences between Gen Y and Gen Z today. The big difference is that Gen Z are highly motivated by development. And if we can change that tune, right? Like it isn't just about you being provided development. It's about you, really saying like, I have to own my development as much as someone else needs to own my development. And that's the biggest miss in the generations right now, is that we just think we're waiting for someone to develop us.
Yeah.
Right. Like
there's been some broad strokes around stereotyping different generations. And I think some of them get a bad rap, quite frankly.
Totally.
How do you think about that career development across the board, rather from Generation Z to X to even, the next gen coming in, the recent graduates that are coming into the workforce?
Yeah, it's really funny. I have hired a couple people recently on my team, and I get, I talk to these brand new, like they're either still in college or they're, a hot second out of college, and they're like, I want to be in management. I'm like, well, what does that mean? Tell me more. And it's like, they don't even, that's just what they went to school for, right? But they don't really understand, like, what are the steps to get to management? So I don't know if I don't even sometimes know, like, how do we help them understand how you get from point A to point B? And in some cases, there isn't a written roadmap to how you get from point A to point B. And that's what they think they're going to get. So I think helping them understand, like, here's things and here's opportunities for you to be, have autonomy. So that's a big one, right? They want autonomy, even though they have no idea what they're doing. They really want autonomy. They want flexibility, but they also don't necessarily know what they're doing. And so how do you walk the fine line of giving them enough direction without making them feel like they don't have the autonomy, to also saying, like, you still have to do a job and you still have to be here and create this opportunity to learn. I think that's a big part of the whole Gen Z to millennial, is that we're trying to give them the autonomy that they want without, stepping on their creativity. Because that's what I think the younger generation brings, is this like whole new level of creativity.
I love the energy. I love being around these young people, though. I love the energy, and I love the ideas and how they're evolving and thinking about things that that I've never even remotely dreamt of, and sit there and say, I'm talking to a recent grad and they ran the investment fund of one of the largest universities in the Midwest. And I'm like, you ran the investment fund for the last 6 months of this group? Like, yeah. I go, well, how was your return? Oh, we had a 13% return. I had some good things going on there. Walk me through it. I'm at 20, 21.
Yeah.
It was amazing. It's amazing career development. So we think about the development they're having at school and what they're doing to how we're going to have to adjust career development moving forward. Something that I love is part of well-being. To me, it's part of well-being.
Yeah.
Jay, you've evolved your career. How have you evolved your career? What points did you in your development connect the dots?
For me, and you're talking about the young people on your team looking to be in management. To me, that's the biggest inflection point in my career is going from someone who is paid to do work for someone who is there to make sure that work gets done. And that was a huge change. And I struggled with that. I still struggle with that to this day, that I miss. I like in my head, I think about this as working for a living, right? I miss that I would develop software. I would be the front end developer for that. And the further you remove, the further you become a manager or a director or executive, whatever, the further you are removed from what got you into it and what you were excited about coming out of college, and what kind of brought air to your lungs and you've got to find entirely new things. And for a lot of people, when you're looking to advance, you think that's maybe the direction you want to go, but you don't really know that. There's no way to know that. You hear a lot of people talking about getting promoted to the level where they fail. And I think giving people optics into that is something that they need, and giving people career pathing that is not just management, that individual contributors can be senior, tenured, valued, and listened to. So for me, it was moving from someone who is basically an IT person to thinking about myself as a leader primarily that happened to do IT in this past life. That was really tough for me. Still is.
So Ali, going back to the generations and understanding their needs, when you think about one of the things that we're doing at Navigate is we're prioritizing personalization. We feel that's what the next generation is. They're going to expect. Maybe drive down on that a little bit. Being a thought leader, is that what you're seeing? Is that what your folks are asking you for as well?
I mean, our life is now personalized, right? So everything that you do, you probably have some personalization, whether you believe it or not. But you can't pick up your phone and not have something on your phone personalized. And I think 98% of the population has some sort of smartphone today. And everything that you do has some sort of personalization to it. And it doesn't really matter. Even if you go to an online, order something online, like it's going to tell you, it's going to remember what you ordered last time and recommend something. And then it's going to recommend something else that you should get because you ordered whatever the last time. So that is an expectation that I think a lot of organizations struggle with because they don't know how to do it, because it's really hard, right? So the more leaders can personalize their interaction with their team, even if you don't necessarily have it as an organization, if the leader can give some personalization to what you're trying to do, and Microsoft is coming out with all kinds of things. I mean, it doesn't matter what technology you're using, there's personalization happening. It's just a matter of how are you connecting it back to the work that they do, the work that you do as a leader, and then all the other parts of their life that are already personalized.
And potentially all the benefits that we're adding to match up with what the generations are asking for or potentially engaging with.
Yeah. And I would tell every client that we work with is don't add anything more until you already know what you have. Because we find that, it doesn't matter if you're benefits, HR, CEO, CFO, whatever you are, you're adding more things every day, right? And it isn't necessarily just in the benefit book. It might be something in technology that you're adding, or it might be something in your environment that you're adding. So you've got all of these things that you're trying to make the person, work better, work harder, stay at your company, or bring them into your company. It doesn't matter what you're doing. That personalization thing happens in lots of different ways. And so recognizing that in your organization, whatever that is really important. And just knowing it's not just a benefit thing or an HR thing. It's really much more broad than that. I even say things like, whatever you're doing on social media, like the person that you're trying to hire knows about you, whether you want them to know about you or not. And it starts well before they even knew anything about you or anything about the role that they're applying for or you're recruiting them for. So your social media is so important. And I would even go to the extent to say it's probably more important than your website, because they generally will look at your socials before they'll go to your company website. So if you've got something on your social media that doesn't represent what your company says you are, there's going to be some sort of mismatch. And we know that younger generation is looking for
the purpose side.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Love it.
The one thing I would say about communication is that you have to have tons of different modes, right? Like you can't just have one anymore. And we go back and we talk to employees all the time. We talk to 60,000 employees a year, and email is always number one. But that doesn't mean you can't not have all the other things, right? Like you have to have all the other things, but they will still check the box of email is most important.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, the most communication that's going on inside an organization is through options that are not controlled by the organization. People are talking over text messages. People are having, shooting snaps back and forth, or, Be Real or TikTok or something like that. That's where culture is sort of created in the back channel. It's like it used to be the meeting after the meeting. Now it's the online conversation on the app after the meeting, right?
Right. Or during the meeting.
Or during the meeting. Yeah. That happens too. Jay, we need the best day ever. Go for it.
It's going to be kind of lame, but I got really excited the other day because I bought a new car recently and it's rained a ton and the windshield wipers were just awful. So I put brand new fancy Rain-X windshield wipers and I drove around in it, and I just feel really good and safe about myself driving in the car now because I put new windshield wipers. I know it's so lame, but I get in there and it's raining and I feel safe, and it doesn't make that really loud noise anymore. My best day ever right now is good windshield wipers.
Ali Payne. Leap over that.
My best day ever. If that's your best day ever, wow. I have a relatively dry sense of humor, and my OB has also a very dry sense of humor. And my best day ever that I can think of right now is the day that I found out I was pregnant with twins. The buddies, that is. I knew I was pregnant. So Charlie and I go to the doctor or go to the OB appointment, and he's in there looking around. And I was like, what are you doing? It's taking so long. And he's like, well, that's baby A. And I was like, baby A? And he said, yep. And there's baby B. And I was like, oh, okay. What are you still doing? And he's like, I'm just making sure there's not baby C or baby D in there. At your age, that could happen. And I was like, ouch, that hurt. But anyway, he said, yes, we found out we were having the buddies, twins. Didn't know if it was boys or girls, but we knew it was twins, identical twins. We knew it at that time. And I was freaking out. And as we were driving home, I was freaking out. And Charlie was trying to calm me down. And he said, Allie, you know that God only gives you what you can handle. And I said, well, God doesn't know who I am then. But the buddies are here. They're almost 7, and they're pretty amazing. And coming from someone who never wanted kids, it's pretty cool to have 3. I have 3. For those of you who don't know me, I do have 3 children, Olive, Fritz, and Otto, the buddies. So that was probably the best day ever. Or maybe the best day ever was when they actually came healthy, but finding out you were having twins was pretty cool.
That's awesome. That's the best day. My best day is one of my favorite teachers was recently recognized at our high school for his long service, and it was just great. It was great to go back, see my old teacher and coach, spend some time with him and his family. And my best day is just to all the teachers out there as we're getting toward the end of the school season. Just a big thank you. Teachers are amazing. Please know that you are seen. Please know that you are valued. And thanks for listening to all of us parents that don't know all that's going on during the school year and whatnot. But we so appreciate you working side by side with us. And teachers are amazing. And very thankful for all the wonderful teachers in my life and in my kids' life and in all of our lives. So thank you, teachers, and enjoy your summer. Ali, thanks for joining us. It's always awesome. Jay, always fun. Really appreciate you guys listening in. If we continue to bring you value, please subscribe, like us, provide us input. We really appreciate it. We do listen. Please know that you are seen, you are valued, and you are heard. And thank you for all that you do out there. And have a good rest of the day. See you. Bye-bye.